right, are you able to share your screen, Tara?
I am working on it. Yep.
Great.
Technology is great as long as it works.
Mhm.
Thank you, man, and thank you, Angela, for the opportunity for us to present this topic on disaster recovery. CommWest serves the Western Slope. We've been managing people's technology for 20 years. We're what's considered to be a managed service partner, or MSP is kind of the technical term for us. And we help keep our clients' technology working so they can grow their business. Disaster recovery is a pretty deep topic. We're going to kind of cover it from a overview perspective, try and give you some tools that might help you think it through for your business, for your clients and things that you're working with. We need to kind of go through the presentation just to kind of get the whole grasp of it. And but if you have questions and stuff, please chat those to Tara. It's Tara with an H on there. She'll manage those for us, and then at the end we'll have a little bit of Q&A and try and answer questions for you there. No? Oh, there you go. Cool.
All right, let's start by defining disaster recovery. It's basically an organization's method of regaining or maintaining access and functionality to not only its IT infrastructure, but all of its infrastructure in events such as a natural disaster, cyber attack, service outage, anything related to a business disruption, including our recent pandemic. There's a variety of disaster recovery methods that can be part of a disaster recovery plan, including avoidance, recovery, and in the worst case, rebuilding.
So that's kind of a general description for disaster recovery, but let's talk about why you would need it. In today's day and age with cyber attacks, phishing, other events that are going on, we see them in the news on a daily basis. A business needs to have a disaster recovery plan in place. Sorry, can't say that 3 times fast. It's not a question of if you'll need it, but it's going to be a question of when you need it. And you need to think of it as an insurance policy.
We have run into several situations like this in the last 3.5 years that I've been with CommWest. We had one customer, a fairly large customer, that was hit by a ransomware attack. It was not directly a fault of any of the employees, but it happened. They got in, they did their reconnaissance, they did their homework, and they targeted the business's financial server. Luckily, we were doing the backup for that server. We were able to recover. It took us about 6 hours from the time we were first notified of the issue to the time they were back up and running. There was obviously more in-depth recovery after that, but basic functionality was regained in 6 hours, which the management of that business was very pleased of. We also had a customer hit with a sophisticated phishing attack. They were actually phished from the outside. Somebody created a false, the business hiring, like an Indeed account.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
And then we were notified of it because they started getting all these emails from Indeed. And there was actually a lawsuit that came from that targeted at our customer, even though it was all external. But there again, we were able to get it under control, regain control of that Indeed account, and get everything squared away and get them back up and running and really minimize the damages from it.
And in both cases, those 2 clients had some sort of disaster recovery plan in place. It wasn't necessarily as robust in the one case as it should have been, but they did know what to do, and we were able to help them out. So big picture, what does a disaster recovery plan look like? The plan will be different for each business. If you're a small business with one computer and you have critical files, it's pretty simple to back it up, get those files off site and stuff, whether you're using cloud backup, even in the most simplest form, people back it up to an external hard drive and take it off. We don't like that plan because there's a human factor in it. You have to remember to do it all the time, but at least they're attempting, and they're, hopefully they have an offsite copy. If you're a larger organization, using the cloud, and things for some of your applications and your network and other equipment, it's a lot more sophisticated.
A couple of different examples. Nate went into one. The one computer, it's real easy to back that up. You back up your critical files, your passwords, that kind of stuff. If something were to happen to that computer, be it an electrical issue or if somebody spills their coffee on it or whatever, you can real easily run down to Best Buy, pick up a new one, put your stuff back on there. My previous job was a much larger organization. We had 150 employees across 8 branches in 2 states. We had a very well documented, very robust DR plan. A copy of it lived offsite at each branch. And then the branch manager also had a copy that they kept at home in the event that that branch was completely gone. It covered things, every possible scenario. And we tested it on a regular basis. We had tabletop discussions, if this is the scenario, how are we going to handle it? And then the 2015 flu that tore through Grand Junction, we had almost 75% of our staff out at one of our larger offices. And we were able to put it in place and maintain minimum operations to keep everybody happy during that time.
So first question we want to ask is, do you have a disaster recovery plan at your organization? And if so, who would be the go-to person if an event happened? Please submit your questions, submit your answers to everyone so that Manon can see it and we can get you credit for attending the course. So we'll give you a few minutes to type those in.
Looks like we're getting some responses. They currently, or their old employer did. Mannon's asking Angela if they have.
And Angela, what do you have?
No.
So a recent survey of 150 business decision makers showed that 73% of them had experienced some sort of a failure at some point. 2/3 of them had had it within the last 12 months, half noting it occurred in the last 6 months. And only 54% of those had an actual documented company-wide disaster recovery plan. So that's about 30% of that 150 people actually had done some preparation and were prepared.
All right, so there's 3 things that you need to have in place before a disaster happens if you want a chance at recovering in a graceful manner. In the most simplest terms, you've got your policies, which describes who you are and what you do. You have your procedures, which explain how you perform those daily tasks. And then you have the technology that allows you to perform those daily tasks and hopefully the backup procedures and recovery procedures associated with that technology. Your disaster recovery, if done correctly, is built into every area of your business. Again, not just the IT infrastructure.
Digging a little deeper into policies, remember it's who are you and what do you do? These are not specific to disaster recovery situations, but are built from within the procedures. They're very general in nature. They identify the company rules, explain why they exist, tell what the rules, when the rules apply, describe who it covers, shows how the rule is enforced, describes the consequences, and are normally described using very simple sentences and paragraphs. Example, in a bank, the policy may be that as a teller, you'll balance your drawer before you leave at the end of the day, no exception. And then you would have actions if that didn't happen or if there was problems. In a business, it may be it may be that every email will be responded to within 4 hours, or every phone call will be answered by a live person by the 3rd ring. You may have a policy or should have a policy about BYOD, which stands for bring your own device. A lot of businesses have people with employees that are bringing in their own tablets, their own laptops, or particularly cell phones that are actually using the company network and handling company files and things like that. Should have a policy in place for how you're going to deal with that, what's allowed, what's not allowed, and what you're going to do in the event somebody that did do that loses their cell phone. Or maybe they leave, and how do we make sure that they don't still have access to those company files?
Looking a little bit more in your procedures, which again is how you perform your daily tasks. This is a description of how you accomplish your policies, both during normal operation and during a disaster scenario. You identify specific actions and explain when to take those actions. We'll get into that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. It also describes alternatives. If this system is down, then we will take, handwritten notes until that system comes back up, at which point we'll play catch up and get all that data entered in. It also includes warnings and cautions, things along the lines of, this data is very critical. Think PCI. We will not store credit card data anywhere in our system. It gives examples, and it sometimes shows you how to complete your internal forms, how to do your time, how things must be documented. These are typically written in an outline or a step type format. In simple terms, it describes how you accomplish the policies that you identified. And remember that these need to be documented in a way that anybody that's trained in your industry can pick them up and carry out the action items.
When it comes to your policies and procedures, the more complicated the business, obviously, the more complicated your policy and procedures are going to be. It may be as simple or as complex as you want them to be, but keep in mind that they need to fit your business. There is no one size fits all, and things such as employee count and industry will affect these things. Very similar to what you folks all deal with your HR things. Different size organizations, different types of organizations need different policies and procedures. It may seem like an exercise in futility, but not having these things documented can be the difference between recovering or not recovering from a disaster.
Technology, you need to have your policies in place, your policies and procedures in place and documented, but do you have the technology in place to accomplish them? Do you have all of the necessary equipment that you outlined? Do you have plan B in the event that plan A isn't working or is unavailable? Any number of different things. We'll get into some of those examples a little bit more in depth.
Your business is operating, running smoothly. That's great. But what about the scenarios that impact your businesses? The things you can't always predict or plan. These are the things that you need to be able to recover from. If you're using a cloud network application and your internet is out, what will you do? If your file server is down and your employees can't access your software programs and things, how will you continue to service your clients? Those would be the things that you document in a disaster recovery plan. Using some past examples for recently here, if you're dependent on deliveries and things, how would you handle it with I-70 being closed? My wife's a nurse, and I know that she works in radiology, and they've had a lot of problems getting their treatments and stuff over from Denver because they only last for a certain amount of hours, and they have to figure out alternatives. So, it's looking at all of the details of your business and what goes on and how you could be impacted by things. It needs to affect, address all the different scenarios that could affect your business. What did I say? In the next slide, we'll be going through some examples and break out some categories for you.
Environmental, this is kind of the classic scenario, a weather event or something happens that causes you to have to readdress how you do business. A building fire is one of the worst. You lose everything. You lose your paper files. You lose all of, hopefully not all of your backups, but potentially all of your backups. You lose your originals. You lose all kinds of stuff. Something else that doesn't affect us too much in Grand Junction is flooding. If you have customers or branches that are near coastlines, especially in hurricane prone areas, you have to worry about that every year. Something else that we've run into here in Junction is ice storms, where the town is essentially shut down for a full day because it's too dangerous to go out on the roads. And then something that hits home for all of us is a global or local pandemic. Obviously we've just been dealing with COVID, but I had mentioned earlier that the flu of 2015 hit Grand Junction really, really hard. And we had a huge number of people out at my previous job. Nate had already talked about Glenwood Canyon as an example, but that can affect you too, not just your vendors. What if you have out-of-town jobs? Nate and I have been trying to figure out, we've got an out-of-town job that we need to get done by the end of the month. Right now, I-70 is open, but it's looking a little dark outside. Might not stay open for long. Fires, power outages, that's one that a lot of people don't think about, but is critical. If you have a bunch of in-house equipment, how are you going to maintain that equipment during an extended power outage? And these all affect our businesses in different ways, and we need to have thought about all of those different ways ahead of time so that if and when something does happen, you know how to move forward.
Another threat that we deal with is internal. Internal scenarios that you need to be able to recover from. Key employees missing, equipment failure, IT or otherwise. If you're in manufacturing and you lose one of your machines, data destruction or accidental or malicious. And again, service outages, electricity, the internet, your phone, your water, your air conditioning. I had a couple of customers recently, with the heat we've been having, their air conditioning's out and they're trying to figure out, how to keep people working. An example, bookkeeping, your bookkeeper is out with the family emergency and will be out for 3 weeks. How do you handle that job while they're out? An employee has a bad Monday, like Thomas talked about earlier, and spills coffee all over their PC first thing in the morning. How do you handle that? If they're key personnel, need to be working on their computer, what contingencies do you have in place to deal with that?
Next category is external. It's fairly common for external events, external scenarios to affect your business. This may be something like a vendor that has supply chain issues. I know that at CommWest, we've been hit hard by this in the last 6 months or so. A lot of our vendors, we can't get equipment from, a lot of equipment we just can't get, period, because of chip shortages in China. And that's eventually trickled down to us. You could have an integral vendor or system go down. I'm sure that we've all seen on the news some of the larger data breaches and larger issues that have happened out in the world. Those can affect you directly if that is important for your business. And that ties in real nicely with any cloud vendor or program or your internet being down. You could also end up with a malicious scenario. Somebody is out to get you and they have picked you and they're going to get you. That can be a rogue employee, a virus, or a targeted ransomware attack. I'm sure that we all remember going back to Target back in, when was that, 2016, 2017, something like that. That attack started with an external vendor at their HVAC company. That had access to the network to monitor their systems. They got breached due to a phishing attack, and then eventually worked their way into one of the biggest data breaches in history. We've also very recently had a situation where a disgruntled employee broke into the facility after hours, went into the back room where all of their networking equipment was, and just did damage just because they were upset. They destroyed some equipment. They moved some cables around so things wouldn't work and so that it would take some time to reverse engineer it and just basically wreak havoc. It's interesting, all of the different things that you have to think about in these tabletops and in these discussions and plannings.
So we've talked about knowing what you need to recover from and what scenarios will impact your business at some point throughout its lifespan. But we also need to talk about, when do you start using your disaster recovery plan? Sometimes it can be kind of a gray area. If the internet is out for an afternoon, it's an inconvenience. But if it's going to be longer, then you may need to institute some of your disaster recovery plans to how you're going to deal with that and keep employees working, keep taking care of your customers. If a critical piece of equipment fails, you need to be ready to act. And part of that disaster recovery plan would be, those action steps. And when do we determine that this time we need to, pull the trigger on this? We need to call these guys. We need to start making other arrangements. So that would be part of the plan too.
All right. Now that we've identified what you need to recover from and how you'll do it and when you'll do it, how will your technology work for you in that situation? Do you have the right tools, redundancies, backups, relationships, et cetera, that you need to provide yourself a recovery path? Do you have the right partners in place to help you make the right decisions? Will you be able to access the tools that you need? If you have a cloud system or internal resources, that's going to look different. Can your employees work from home if the office is offline or shut down due to what we're still going through right now, a global pandemic? Do you need to protect yourself from data loss? If you have cloud systems, your vendor probably takes care of this for you, but how long will it take for them to recover, and how will you handle that downtime? Even more important, if your data and software is stored locally, this responsibility falls on you and your business. Most of the time, if you're hosting your own software, even if you have support with a vendor, they are not doing your backups, and that is your responsibility. And then something else that you always need to think about is, will you and how will you notify your customers that things may take longer than necessary because of this situation? And it's not just your customers. If, depending on the industry you're in, you may have reporters knocking on your door. You need to have canned PR statements ready that can be manipulated so that you can eloquently voice your situation and not scare people. False fear is one of the biggest things that can destroy a business. And if that first PR statement is not handled well, then it could end up with a really bad situation on your hands.
Let's go to question 2. Do you feel you need to review your policies and procedures? If those are in place, does your disaster recovery plan match up? Again, please answer in the chat to everyone so Amanda can see it, and make sure you guys are getting your credits.
No responses so far.
Has everybody gone to sleep already?
Yeah. Upper management does the review, probably quarterly. We have them, but it would be good to review. Definitely an area to work on.
Cool. Good.
If you're feeling like you don't know what you need or don't know where to start, you're not alone. In fact, unless you are not only an IT professional, but also trained in every aspect of your business, then you do need some help. If you work in an industry that has other heavy equipment, you need to consult with those guys. If you have a large fleet of company trucks, you need to consult with your mechanics. You need to have a good grasp on all aspects of this. Doing a backup to a hard drive or a memory stick that's connected to a critical computer is not a DR plan. It could be part of your DR plan, but it's not a DR plan. You need to consult with an IT vendor that can review the equipment that you have, the software that you have, your processes and procedures, and make suggestions and help you to come up with this plan so that you can have a plan for virtually every scenario. If your office is already working in the cloud with cloud softwares and things like that, then you're already partway there. A cloud service should be doing backup for you, and they should be able to restore your data in the event of a breach. And your contract with them should specify what they're doing and the timeframes that you're looking at. And if it doesn't, then you should open that dialogue and come up with a plan so that you can plan around that. Even if you are almost completely in the cloud, you typically have some files on site that are going to be critical. These could be your QuickBooks databases, other customer specific information, your HR documents, things of that nature. And that stuff is just as important as your core business applications. What are you using that's not in the cloud, and what would happen to your business and your productivity if that data was lost or damaged? A DR plan will have these options laid out, and you'll know what to do when something happens. Waiting for a crisis to happen before you start trying to plan for a crisis is not effective, and it will really slow down your recovery.
So part of that would be not waiting till you have the disaster to start looking for the disks and the licenses for that software that you're going to need to restore, because it just really lengthens the process.
All right, we're going to get into some things that are a little bit more IT specific. The first one is about your backups. A common misconception about disaster recovery is that it's only about your data. Recovering your data is very important, that you need to recover it, whether it's lost, corrupted, or stolen. Backups are a critical part of any DR plan, but they're not the only part. Depending on the scenario that you're recovering from, you need something to recover that data onto. A backup server, a secondary workstation, the list goes on. The 3-2-1 rule states that at any given time, you need to have 3 copies of your data, 2 copies on a different storage media, and 1 copy offsite. That protects you from virtually every situation. The 3 copies, one of those is going to be your current working copy, whatever lives on your computer or on your server, and then 2 backup copies, preferably of different ages. You don't want to have 2 backup copies from last night, because you could run into a situation where your data is corrupted yesterday and you just overwrote your 2 good backup copies. It's good to have those spaced out in different times so that if needed, you can go farther back in time to get that data. 2 copies on a different storage media. So having all 3 of your backup copies saved on the same server or the same thumb drive doesn't do you any good. One thumb drive, is fine, but you need to also have a separate hard drive, maybe a tape backup if you have a large amount of data, or a cloud backup, something that is on somebody else's equipment, somebody else's server somewhere else. And then 1 copy offsite. We had mentioned if your building burns down, it's important to have that offsite copy so that you have something else that you can recover from. This first slide is a typical small office. You've got 2 or 3 computers, and then you've got a NAS device that you're backing those computers or backing the data from those computers up onto, and then you're backing them up onto the cloud. And this does cover the 3-2-1 rule. You'll have 3 copies, 1 on your workstation, 1 on the NAS, and 1 in the cloud. 2 different storage medias. You've got your NAS in the building, your cloud outside of the building. And then the cloud backup is your physical location. Any one of those components could fail, and you still have 2 copies of your data that you can work from, recover from, etc. They're on physical separate locations, so you could lose a building or lose that facility and still be good to go. This next slide is a typical larger facility. You have your workstation, just like before, but in this case, it doesn't actually store any data. It's essentially a dumb terminal. All of your data is stored on your domain controller. That's the big gray box there in the center. You then need 2 more copies of that data. That would typically get replicated to an on-site backup appliance, and that then replicates overnight to the cloud. So they're, again, very similar. You've got all the pieces of the 3-2-1 rule. And this scenario has the added benefit of that appliance, potentially configured correctly, being able to actually perform the roles of that server in the event that that server went down. We've had a couple of customers that had older equipment recently that failed. We were able to recover from it, and using a situation very similar to this.
Cool. Talking about equipment failure. Next part we want to talk about is life cycle management. The tangible aspects of your technology are as important as your disaster recovery plan. And that's basically the physical hardware in your office. Investing in your network and hardware is a critical part of any business continuity. And even a small equipment failure can cause major problems that could have been avoided. In the enterprise or business world, a computer, desktop, laptop typically is expected a lifespan of 3 to 5 years. Lost productivity to a slow machine adds up fast when you realize it. 15 minutes a day of extra time because of a slow machine times 5 days a week times 52 weeks a year on somebody that's got a $50,000 salary, you're spending $1,500 a year because of slow performance on that workstation or laptop. New computer costs less than that. So our point is you really need to be investing in your technology. That's really a critical part of any business plan, is to continue, upgrade management and things to keep things working. I expect you've all had dealt with issues with your people where they've had a desktop or a laptop fail. And they either because it wasn't maintained or it was just old. Having a life cycle management plan and replacing your equipment is cheap insurance.
With your servers, we like to follow a similar model. In the enterprise world, a server has a lifespan of 5 to 7 years. Part of the reason for the longer lifespan is it is a larger investment. We also like to think that they're in nice, clean, temperature-controlled environments where we don't have to worry about cups of coffee being spilled on them. Again, just to kind of put things in perspective, 2 days of downtime in a small business that has 10 employees at an average $50,000 a year salary is $4,000 in lost wages, or in wages that you lost. You're paying them, they can't do their job. And going a little bit deeper, if you were to lose productivity for $1 million a year business for 2 days, that's $7,600 in lost productivity. Something else that needs to be taken into account is data loss. It's typically intangible, but it gets very expensive very quickly. Think about for a second, if you had to collect all of your data from all of your employees, recreate forms, rebuild your CRM system, all of that kind of stuff, you can get an idea very quickly of how fast those costs add up. And a new server installed starts at about $10,000. Obviously, depending on your needs, it varies, but that's a good ballpark. Something else that we like to tell people is that you're not just replacing equipment for the sake of replacing it. We've talked several times about needing someplace to restore to. In a lot of cases, this equipment that you just replaced is still viable. It still functions. You can use that in the event of a disaster to maintain your business.
Could be your fallback.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Yep. We've already mentioned malicious scenarios that your businesses will need to recover from. Preventing against those type of scenarios is a matter of utilizing various tools and awareness. In the most basic, machines need to have antivirus. That's obviously your office machines. Most people aren't going to argue with you that you need that. You need it on your servers. But if you have remote workers and things, they need to be running antivirus too. Because if they're, depending upon how they're connecting to your network, if they're connecting, doing file sharing, accessing the server, running applications and stuff, those devices they're using to do that can be infecting the rest of the network if they're not being monitored and have antivirus. Two-factor authentication. It's kind of a new term. It's been around for a little bit, but people are becoming more aware of it. A lot of you may be using it like on your Gmail. If you log into your Gmail from somewhere that you haven't logged in before, it'll may pop up and you have to, on your cell phone, you click yes and it lets you connect. Microsoft Office 365, that is a new, or not a new feature, but that is a feature that can be turned on that. And that is very effective in preventing people from being hacked. Even if somebody did get your password without the two-factor authentication, they would not be able to get in, send out malicious emails, contact all your contacts and things like that. There is a little annoyance factor with that because it's an extra step. It takes a little bit longer, and same with other applications and programs and cloud things that you log into. But management really needs to adapt that and accept it and then push it down through the ranks, just as a protection or a prevention, so you're not having to use your disaster recovery. Having an email filtering system such as Barracuda or Mimecast to filter emails can be very effective in catching a lot of these malicious emails and phishing attacks and things that come. A vendor that's monitoring your machines and your servers and your network 24/7, managing the patching, making sure that the machines are all running at their optimum, and just watching to make sure that some of this nefarious stuff isn't happening and people aren't getting in your network that shouldn't. Another big part is educating your employees to recognize phishing attacks and some of these other attacks. It is really hard. Some of these emails that we see come through, I mean, they look so legit. I'm sure you've all seen them, you know, from your credit card company, your bank. It's like, hey, we need to update our records, click here, you know, and then they get your password and then they get this and they get that. We had a customer that had an email come in. I think they said they were the bank, but you know, we needed to verify, update all our records. And it was a blank sheet of paper, fill out all this stuff with all your account information, your routing, your passwords and stuff. She went and got the owner to sign it. They submitted it and it was all bad. It was all bad. And again, it, you know, it wasn't intentional. It wasn't malicious on the employee's part. They just weren't aware and keeping track of what was going on. And the giveaway for us when we actually went out and found it and saw it was that it originated from a Gmail account, which is usually pretty fishy. If I mean, somebody at Wells Fargo or your credit card, you know, Chase or, you know, and stuff, they're not going to be emailing you with the Gmail account. If they are, you probably need to deal with somebody else. Policies that dictate how to handle sensitive data and systems. Policies about who has access to these files, who has access to this data, who's responsible for making sure that it's being backed up, you know, and those things. Who's responsible for making sure we remove these users when an employee leaves? Same, you're always struggling when you get a new employee. You know, you guys are HR, so I know you're dealing with that all the time. You know, and you got to get them added to the computer and get them on the payroll and get all these other things. But you need to reverse engineer that when you lose somebody too, and make sure that they don't still have access to records and files and things like that. And then the big one, it's the hard one, is enforcing these policies and procedures. Really, your security, especially your IT security, it really comes down to it's everybody's job. Anybody that's on your network, anybody that's using office equipment, anybody that's accessing office files and things, it's their responsibility to watch out and protect the company.
All right, digging a little bit more into email security and antivirus. Email security helps to protect you against incoming messages such as phishing and/or spear phishing, impersonation attempts where somebody is trying to impersonate, say, the owner of the company, ransomware and viruses. It also goes the other way. It helps to protect your customers if somebody from your company has their password compromised and starts sending out those same things. A lot of times, properly configured, your email security system will stop those messages from going out and help to prevent the reputation damage that can happen from being the source of some of those emails. Antivirus software lives on your workstations, your servers, your laptops, all that kind of stuff, and helps to protect against misleading and malicious downloads. Most of the times those come in the form of viruses and malware, ransomware, things of that nature. Also helps to prevent against browser hijacks and puny code, which are ways of getting you to websites that you did not intend to go to. And that's actually a lot of where those malicious downloads come from is, you know, you're trying to download Adobe Acrobat or something like that. And it takes you to a website that is not what you think it is. And then you end up downloading a virus. When it asks if you want to let this program make changes to your computer, you say yes, because I'm trying to update this piece of software that I need. And next thing you know, they're in. In addition to this, you know, all of the technical controls in the world are only as good as the operators. Your employees, your coworkers need to be trained. People bypass this security all the time. But if they know the risks and know how good some of these attacks are, they'll think twice. There's more on this in a few slides, but you know, you teach them what to look for and how to handle that. A good analogy for this: you wouldn't let somebody without a driver's license get into your car. Why would you let somebody that doesn't know how to operate a computer into the core of your network?
So we've talked a lot about technology and tools and safeguards. And stuff and how critical that is to your business. But at some point, the issues you will need to recover from is going to be because of human error or software in a software package that, I'm sorry, saying that wrong. We'll be recovering from human error. And no matter how much you pay for technology and software packages and stuff, that is not going to protect you. You know, in the case I gave before where the employee gave out all the information, there is no way technology wise we can stop that from happening. Like Thomas was just talking about, that's a big part of that education. Just make people think about what they're doing, look at it a little deeper, and maybe ask some questions. You hear a lot of these emails or incidences where somebody emailed the finance person back at home office and said, hey, I'm traveling, I need this money for this, or send this to Bob in Chicago. Here's the routing numbers. I just signed this contract or something, and all of it's nefarious, all of it's false. And people are sending money places that they shouldn't and don't want to. So, and a big part, like Tom was saying, employees need to be aware of what they're doing and think about it. 70% of the attacks last year were completed with the help of a person in the organization. Most cases, it was not intentional, but it still happened. It's phishing, it's ransomware, it's hacks. All these different things everybody needs to be watching for. Question 3. Do you feel you would recognize a phishing email when it comes into your mailbox? The other question would be, would your employees? So if you can answer that to everybody so Manning can see it.
I hope so. Try to most of the time. Yes, a lot of them are mentioning they go through training. One of them, they go through cybersecurity training every 90 days.
Cool. Excellent.
Yep.
Good.
Those are all good things.
Unfortunately, and I think we all know this, most of the time is not good enough most of the time. All it takes is one person that's having a bad day or gets overworked, doesn't take the time to give it that second look. And that's the example that Nate and I have been using for a few slides. That's exactly what happened. The gal that received the email had a lot that she needed to get done. It was the first of the month. She was trying to get reports out, and she just didn't take the time to look at it and think about it before she passed it up the ladder to somebody that can do some real damage.
And with that, it's not just their managers, the salespeople, the owners and things like that that you need to worry about. Your receptionist can get get a phishing attack and respond to or forward to someone it shouldn't. HR people, we've talked about that. You guys are one of the primary ones that people are targeting for these attacks, because you get emails from people all the time. You have no idea who they are. You don't know how valid they are. Even somebody sending you a legitimate resume, what looks like a legitimate resume, as a PDF. There's codes and things that can be put into PDFs that actually do stuff on the backside of your machines that you're not aware of. It can load some packets and they can eventually take over your network and things. That's where you need to have some good safeguards in place that are watching your, as you're opening documents and stuff. Ask yourself, do you feel you would recognize a phishing email when it comes to your inbox? And with the employees and the coworkers? That's what we just asked you, so we don't have to do that again. Sorry. Just read my notes twice. So
one of the phrases that I like to use is think before you click. We've talked a lot about training, and that's because it is very important. We don't mean to keep beating the dead horse, but it's very important. And unfortunately, ultimately, your employees and the users on your network are the final protection that you have against a lot of these things. My previous job, we actually had mouse pads printed that had some email red flags, some things to look for printed on the mouse pads. And we had a company policy that said, thou shalt use this mouse pad. And it sounds kind of corny, but it actually did keep that in the forefront of people's minds. And we had several people come to us in the IT department that said, at first we thought these mouse pads were stupid, but seeing it every day really does make a difference. We do have a phishing sheet on our website, something that you can look at to help you look at some of these red flags. And something that you can also pass on to your fellow employees so that you have something that you can have in front of you, and a talking point in the morning meeting. It'd be worth just bringing it up, just keep it in the forefront of everybody's minds. It's also not just about emails. This is also for in-person conversations, phone calls, that kind of stuff. It really does affect every aspect of your business and your communications. So we've thrown a lot of information your way in the last 40 minutes or so. here's what disaster recovery really boils down to. It's part of every aspect of your business, from your computers, your employees, your equipment in the field, your trucks on the road, your vendor supply chains. It's everywhere. And a good disaster recovery plan is not so specific that it limits you down to a certain set of actions. It needs to be something that's at the same time very general, so that it can be applied to any scenario, because we haven't touched on all of them. There's no way that we can touch on every scenario, and there's no way that you can have specific action items for every scenario. But if you have the generalizations, then you can make inferences based on a specific scenario. And it's very important to have that plan in place, because like we said, if you're trying to put it together the day after a breach or the morning after a breach, it's not going to be pretty, and you're going to wish that you did have that stuff in place.
And like we've said before, it involves more than just technology. It's everything. Your disaster recovery policy is a daily activity. Just like your HR policies are, it's daily. It's something that needs to be instituted and worked on constantly. And they need to be enforced. Insurance only works if you have it before the event. The disaster recovery plan is insurance. A note on that though, if your business is investing in cyber insurance, the carriers for that cyber insurance are going to require you to have these procedures in place before a claim. Otherwise, if you have a claim and they're going to come in and ask for your disaster recovery plan, what your policies are, your training, how you enforce this, and they'll deny the claim if you haven't done the prerequisites, which are the requirements of you, which you should be doing these things regardless of whether you have cyber insurance, but just another reason to implement it. We want to thank you guys for your time and for your attention. We're glad to have this opportunity to share this with you. Hopefully you're realizing it is as important a part of a business and that business continuity as it is. We do have more resources. We've talked about it on our website. You can go to commwestcorp.com. We have some articles and things out there specifically about these things that we've talked about. We are also happy to answer any questions, anything that you've got. I don't know if they've sent anything through, Tara, during it. If you have questions, please send them to Tara, and she will field them to us, and we'll try and get them answered here in the few minutes we have left.
So one of the question was, what was one of the trickiest phishing emails we've seen? I know you touched on a few, but can you think of any others?
The trickiest one that I've seen was one that was actually directed towards the business owner, coming from a legitimate vendor that had their email breached. The email had been breached. It was done very, very well. They had taken the time to read some of the vendor's emails, learn their mannerisms, learn how they pose these questions, how they handle this stuff. And, you know, they got the personal things that you would only know if you had talked to that person, and they included those in their email. And unfortunately, that email was successful, and they ended up managing to redirect. It was about $100,000 in wires to a different bank account under the premise of you know, having some issues with their prior bank. Luckily, I think the banks were able to claw most of that back, but it was still a substantial loss to the company.
Well, just even if you can recover the financial part of it, just the lost productivity and the energy and things that go into it can be pretty big.
One other question is, what is some example language to notify internally? Manny, you may need to clarify your question.
Secret code word that you put in here.
Of a breach. So what would be, you
Oh, okay.
said, you know, candid statements of what you should
So
say.
one of the things, I've mentioned my previous job several times, one of the things that our public PR statements never had in them was an admission of guilt or an admission of fault. It was always things of, we are investigating, there are reports of things of that nature. And something else I should have mentioned earlier associated with that is you need to have noted who is going to be providing those statements. You don't want necessarily, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but you don't want your lowest level employees to be providing those statements. You need to have those come from upper management. Internally, nothing is really coming to mind. Obviously, internally, transparency is more important, so that your employees know what they're dealing with. I'm sorry, Manny, I'm kind of at a loss for that one. That one's got me a little bit stumped.
I think the biggest part would be internally being transparent about what's going on too would be a big thing. So everyone is aware of what is happening.
Yeah.
Well, and coaching them too, you may be contacted by customers, you may be
Mhm.
contacted by the media. Here's what this is what we need to be saying,
Yeah.
and this is
Yeah.
how we need to be handling that. Refer them to the front office or, no comment or something.
Right.
So,
We have another question. How would you suggest approaching your leaders about a DR plan if they don't have one?
It really depends on the personalities of your management types. But I would address it in a very informal environment. If you have an opportunity to sit down over lunch with them or something of that nature, go ahead and send them a link to this presentation. Hey, I know that this is long. I know that you don't have time to listen to it, but I watched this presentation and it really got me thinking. I think that this is something that we need to address. Something else that always worked very well for me at my previous job was offering to spearhead things. A lot of time upper management doesn't have time to deal with some of this stuff, and having somebody else that can spearhead it and then bring them ideas, offer to brainstorm with them. If it's something that's important to you, it should be important to them, and most of the time they'll be open to that.
and don't feel like this is something you're going to turn out in a day or a week. This is going to take time. You're going to, go ahead, you're fine.
And it's never going to be done. You're always going to be updating these things. We had talked about tabletops a little bit, and using some scenarios such as the pandemic as a real world test. You're going to find holes. You're going to find things you missed, things you didn't think about, all that kind of stuff. And so it's going to constantly be evolving. We used to have one person whose only job at my previous job was to maintain the policies, procedures, documentation, and DR plan. And they orchestrated the tests. They came up with the tabletops, and they would engage the different departments to make sure that what was written down actually matched what they were doing.
And good question too, because when we first got asked to do this presentation for you guys, we're thinking about, okay, how do HR people tie into this and things? And some of you are going to be higher management, some of you are just more middle level and things, but still you have big impact on the business, and you have a lot of critical records and a lot of critical information, just payroll and things like that. That are very critical to take care of and things. So we, thought it made a lot of sense really to be talking to you folks, because you are in this position and have the opportunity to advise and maybe push some of your owners a little bit.
Anything else you guys want to share? Those are all the questions.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. We really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you.
Yes, thank you so much for your time. I know I got a lot out of it, and just a reminder to take another look and make sure I do know who I'm supposed to go to should there ever be a breach. We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat, so really appreciate your time and sharing your expertise with us here today.
We
Thank you.
enjoyed putting it together, and I think it also made us think a little bit about our business, our policies, our procedures, and our DR plan. We've got backups in place, but it's probably not as fleshed out as it should be.
It's like you said,
That
it's constantly evolving.
That face right there just said it all.
Thank you all. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Goodbye.